In the sterile corridors of the Pentagon, where power is measured in stars and stripes, one woman would shatter every assumption about strength, courage, and what it truly means to serve. Sarah Chun appeared to be nothing more than a quiet clerk, invisible among the sea of uniforms and briefcases. But beneath her unremarkable exterior lay secrets that could topple governments and skills that had been forged in the world's most dangerous places. Admiral Harrison Burke had built his career on reading people, on knowing exactly who belonged in his world of military elite. He prided himself on spotting weakness from across a room, on maintaining the rigid standards that he believed kept America safe. But on this particular Tuesday morning, his confidence would cost him everything he thought he knew about war, loyalty, and the true meaning of patriotism. What happens when a decorated war hero realizes that the person he dismissed as pathetic holds the key to preventing an international crisis? What happens when years of classified training meet decades of military arrogance? And most importantly, what happens when someone who has spent their entire life being underestimated finally decides to reveal exactly who they really are? This is the true story of how one woman's hidden past would expose the dangerous flaws in America's military hierarchy, save countless lives, and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one no one sees coming. Sarah Chun had perfected the art of being invisible. For 3 years, she had walked the halls of the Pentagon as a civilian administrative assistant, her sensible flats making barely a whisper against the polished floors. Her desk sat in a corner of the Naval Intelligence Wing, surrounded by filing cabinets that seemed to multiply overnight. To everyone around her, she was simply another face in the crowd of support staff who kept the military machine running smoothly. She preferred it that way. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, Sarah would arrive with her thermos of black coffee and her worn leather satchel. She dressed conservatively in muted colors, kept her long black hair pulled back in a simple bun, and wore glasses that had no prescription but served their purpose perfectly. She had learned long ago that being overlooked was often the greatest advantage a person could have. Admiral Harrison Burke first noticed her on a rainy Tuesday in March, not because she stood out, but because she had made what he considered an unforgivable mistake. Sarah had been tasked with organizing files for an upcoming briefing on naval operations in the South China Sea. The Admiral had requested the documents be arranged chronologically, but Sarah had organized them by operational priority instead. "Miss Chun," Admiral Burke's voice cut through the morning quiet like a blade. The man was imposing even while seated behind his massive oak desk. Silver-haired and sharp-eyed, he wore his 4 stars with the kind of authority that came from 30 years of commanding respect through fear. His office walls were lined with commendations, photographs with presidents, and memorabilia from conflicts across the globe. Sarah approached his desk with measured steps, her expression neutral. She had dealt with men like Burke before, though they didn't know it. "Yes, Admiral. These files," he gestured dismissively at the neat stacks on his desk, "are completely out of order. I specifically requested chronological organization. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir. I organized them by operational significance because the briefing concerns current threats, and I believed you believed." Admiral Burke stood slowly, his full height adding weight to his words. "Miss Chun, you are not paid to believe. You're paid to follow orders. Simple orders that apparently even a civilian clerk finds too challenging to execute properly." The other staff members in the vicinity had gone silent. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others eager to witness what they assumed would be her humiliation. She kept her breathing steady, her posture straight, but not defiant. Years of training had taught her when to reveal strength and when to conceal it. "I apologize, Admiral. I'll reorganize them immediately." "No need." Burke waved her off with barely contained disgust. "I'll have someone competent handle it. Someone who understands the importance of precision in military operations." He paused, looking her up and down with the kind of disdain reserved for recruits who couldn't handle basic training. Miss Chun, in my experience, attention to detail is what separates those who serve with honor from those who are simply pathetic. The word hung in the air like smoke from gunpowder. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the muscle memory of a dozen similar moments when someone in authority had underestimated her completely. Not worth the paperwork. Just keep her on filing and basic administrative tasks. Nothing that requires actual thinking. From her corner desk, Sarah continued her work as if she hadn't heard every word. She had spent the better part of a decade learning to control her reactions, to appear smaller and weaker than she actually was. It was a skill that had kept her alive in places where being underestimated meant the difference between completing a mission and ending up in an unmarked grave. But Admiral Burke didn't know about the unmarked graves. He didn't know about the 3 languages Sarah spoke fluently or the 2 more she understood well enough to gather intelligence. He didn't know about her expertise in electronic surveillance, her ability to disarm someone twice her size in under 10 seconds, or her familiarity with weapon systems that didn't officially exist. Most importantly, he didn't know that Sarah Chun wasn't really Sarah Chun. Her real name was classified at levels so high that even admirals weren't cleared to know it. For 8 years, she had been part of a joint military special operations unit that handled situations too sensitive for conventional forces. She had operated in countries that denied American presence, had gathered intelligence from sources who trusted her with their lives, and had successfully completed missions that never appeared in any official records. The unit was known internally as the Gray Program because its operatives existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal, between military and civilian, between hero and ghost. Sarah had volunteered for the program fresh out of MIT, where she had earned dual degrees in computer science and international relations while also completing an unofficial curriculum in combat training that few people knew existed. Her transition to Pentagon desk work wasn't a career change. It was her current assignment. For the past 3 years, she had been monitoring communications, analyzing patterns, and identifying security risks from within the very heart of American military intelligence. Her supervisors in the Gray Program knew that placing her in such a visible yet invisible position was a calculated risk, but Sarah had proven herself capable of maintaining deep cover while producing invaluable intelligence. The work was often tedious, requiring her to spend months building trust and establishing her cover identity while slowly gaining access to information that could protect national security. It required patience, discipline, and the ability to endure the daily humiliation of being treated as incompetent by people who had no idea what real competence looked like. Admiral Burke was not her first target, but he was becoming her most important one. For the past 6 months, Sarah had been tracking unusual patterns in naval communication systems. Someone with high-level access was feeding information to foreign intelligence services, and the methods were sophisticated enough to suggest military training. The leak had already compromised 2 operations in the Pacific, resulting in the loss of strategic advantage and, more importantly, putting American servicemen and women at risk. Sarah's investigation had narrowed the suspects to a small group of senior officers with access to the compromised information. Admiral Burke was on that list, but so were 11 other people with similar clearance levels. She needed more time to determine which of them posed the actual threat. Unfortunately, time was running short. Intelligence suggested that something significant was being planned, something that would require detailed knowledge of American naval capabilities in the South China Sea. If Sarah couldn't identify and stop the leak soon, the consequences could be catastrophic. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed that Admiral Burke seemed particularly agitated. He made several phone calls behind closed doors, sent encrypted messages that bypassed normal channels, and twice left the building for meetings that weren't on his official schedule. Each time he returned, he appeared more tense than before. During her lunch break, Sarah accessed the building's security system using credentials that officially didn't exist. She reviewed footage from the previous week, tracking the Admiral's movements and noting patterns that might reveal his contacts outside the Pentagon. What she found was troubling, but not conclusive. Burke was certainly acting suspicious, but in Sarah's experience, guilty people often behaved exactly like innocent people who were under pressure. That afternoon brought new complications. Sarah was assigned to assist with preparations for a classified briefing scheduled for the following week. The briefing concerned American naval response strategies for potential conflicts in international waters, exactly the kind of information that had been leaked in previous security breaches. As Sarah organized documents and prepared presentation materials, she realized that whoever was feeding information to foreign sources would have perfect access to everything discussed in the upcoming briefing. If she couldn't identify the leak before then, crucial strategic information would almost certainly be compromised. The irony wasn't lost on her. Admiral Burke had dismissed her as pathetic and incompetent, yet she was the only person in the building actively working to protect the very operations he claimed to care about. His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that competence might come in forms he didn't recognize or respect. But Sarah's growing concern wasn't just professional, it was personal. She had spent years serving her country in ways that would never be acknowledged or rewarded. She had sacrificed normal relationships, a conventional career, and even her own identity for the greater good. The idea that someone with Burke's access and authority might be betraying that sacrifice filled her with a cold anger that she kept carefully hidden beneath her mild exterior. As the workday ended, Sarah gathered her belongings with the same quiet efficiency she displayed every evening. She nodded politely to the security guards, exchanged brief pleasantries with the cleaning staff, and walked to her car like any other government employee heading home after a long day. But instead of driving to the modest apartment that served as her official address, Sarah headed to a secure facility across town. In a basement room that didn't appear on any building schematics, she met with her handler, a man known only as Collins, who had been running gray program operations for longer than most people had been alive. Burke's behavior is escalating, Sarah reported, handing over an encrypted drive containing her observations. But I still can't confirm whether he's the source or just someone who's feeling pressure from above. Collins, a thin man in his 50s with gray eyes that missed nothing, reviewed her data on a secure terminal. The timeline is accelerating. Our sources indicate that something big is planned for next month, something that would require detailed knowledge of the information covered in next week's briefing. Then, we need to make a decision, Sarah said. Do I maintain cover and risk losing the intelligence, or do I take more aggressive steps to confirm Burke's involvement? How aggressive? Sarah considered the question carefully. I could access his personal communications, his financial records, his travel history. But doing so would require resources that might compromise my position if discovered. Collins was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks that could affect national security. Do it, he finally decided. But be careful. If Burke is innocent and discovers what you're doing, it could destroy years of work. If he's guilty and realizes he's being investigated. I understand the risks, Sarah assured him. She had been handling dangerous situations long enough to know that sometimes the greatest risk was inaction. As she drove home that night, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had volunteered for the Gray program because she believed in protecting her country, but she had never imagined that the greatest threats might come from within the very institution she had sworn to defend. Admiral Burke saw her as pathetic, incompetent civilian who couldn't even organize files correctly. He had no idea that before morning, she would know more about his personal and professional life than his own wife did. He couldn't imagine that the quiet woman he had dismissed with such disdain was about to determine whether he was a patriot under pressure or a traitor selling out his own country. But Sarah knew that the next 24 hours would change everything. Either she would discover that Admiral Burke was innocent, in which case she would have to find the real threat among his colleagues, or she would confirm that a decorated war hero had been betraying everything he claimed to represent. Either way, the man who had called her pathetic was about to learn that some people were far more than they appeared to be. And Sarah Chun was about to discover whether the sacrifices she had made for her country had been worth the price she had paid for invisibility. Sarah arrived at the Pentagon before dawn, her key card granting her access to levels of the building that most employees never saw. The Gray program had taught her that the best time to work undetected was when the building felt empty, when the only sound were the hum of ventilation systems and the distant footsteps of security guards making their rounds. Her first stop was the secure server room on Sublevel 3. Using access codes that changed daily and were known only to a handful of people with the highest clearances, Sarah connected a specialized device to the main communications hub. The device, no larger than a thumb drive, but infinitely more sophisticated, would monitor all electronic communications flowing through the building's networks without leaving any trace of its presence. The technology was experimental, developed by the same MIT laboratory where Sarah had completed her graduate work. It could intercept, decode, and analyze encrypted communications in real time while remaining completely invisible to standard security sweeps. If Admiral Burke was communicating with foreign agents, this device would capture every message, every file transfer, every suspicious connection. As Sarah made her way back to the upper floors, she reflected on how different this investigation felt from her previous assignments. In places like Kabul or Damascus, the threats were obvious and immediate. Here, in the heart of American military power, the danger was subtle, insidious, and potentially far more destructive. She settled at her desk just as the morning shift began arriving. To anyone watching, she appeared to be starting another routine day of administrative work. But beneath her desk, hidden among the cables that powered her computer, a secure receiver was already collecting data from the device she had installed. Admiral Burke arrived at precisely 8:15, his routine unchanged despite the previous day's tension. Sarah watched him through her peripheral vision, noting that he seemed more alert than usual, his eyes scanning the office as if looking for something or someone specific. When their eyes briefly met across the room, Sarah gave him the same polite nod she offered every morning, her expression betraying nothing. But Burke's reaction was different today. Instead of dismissing her with his usual indifference, he held her gaze for several seconds longer than necessary. Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition, the instinctive awareness that comes when someone realizes they're being watched by someone who might be watching them in return. The morning passed slowly, with Sarah dividing her attention between routine administrative tasks and monitoring the data flowing from her surveillance device. Admiral Burke made several phone calls, but most were routine military business. His computer usage showed normal patterns for someone in his position. If he was guilty of treason, he was being extremely careful about his communications. At 10:30, Sarah received an unexpected assignment. Captain Martinez approached her desk with a stack of classified documents and a request that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Chun, the Admiral needs these files reviewed and summarized for tomorrow's briefing. He specifically requested that you handle this task." Sarah accepted the files with her usual quiet efficiency, but internally, she was analyzing the implications. Yesterday, Burke had called her incompetent and suggested she wasn't capable of handling important work. Today, he was assigning her to review some of the most sensitive naval intelligence documents in the building. Either he had experienced a sudden change of heart about her abilities, or he was testing her for reasons she didn't yet understand. The files contained detailed information about American submarine positions in the South China Sea, planned naval exercises with Allied forces, and contingency strategies for various conflict scenarios. It was exactly the type of information that had been leaked to foreign intelligence services, and exactly the kind of data that could give an enemy significant strategic advantage. As Sarah began her review, she realized that Burke's request created both an opportunity and a trap. If he was innocent, he was simply delegating work to available staff. If he was guilty, he might be trying to determine whether she had access to information beyond her official clearance level. Either way, her response would have to be carefully calculated. She spent the next 2 hours creating a professional summary that demonstrated competence without revealing the full extent of her analytical capabilities. Her report was thorough but not brilliant, insightful but not suspiciously so. It was the work of someone more capable than Burke had originally assumed, but not someone who possessed classified training in intelligence analysis. While she worked, Sarah's surveillance device continued collecting data. Around noon, it detected something unusual, an encrypted communication that originated from Burke's computer but used routing protocols that bypassed the Pentagon's standard security monitoring. The message was brief and heavily encrypted, but the destination was traced to a server farm in Eastern Europe. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she processed the implications. The communication patterns matched exactly with previous security breaches, and the timing coincided with Burke's access to the sensitive files now sitting on her desk. For the first time since beginning her investigation, she had concrete evidence of suspicious activity. But evidence of unusual communications wasn't the same as proof of treason. Burke could have legitimate reasons for using alternative communication channels, particularly if he suspected that the Pentagon's standard systems had been compromised. Sarah needed more information before she could draw any conclusions. The opportunity came sooner than expected. At 2 o'clock, Burke left for what his calendar listed as a dental appointment. Sarah knew from her background research that Burke's dentist was located 20 minutes away, meaning he should return within an hour and a half. She had a narrow window to gather the additional intelligence she needed. Using access techniques learned during her Gray program training, Sarah made her way to Burke's private office. The Admiral's computer was password protected, but Sarah carried tools that could bypass such security measures in minutes. As she worked, she kept one ear tuned to the hallway, listening for footsteps or voices that might indicate someone approaching. Burke's computer revealed a complex picture. His official communications were exactly what she would expect from someone in his position. Operational briefings, personnel reports, budget discussions, and correspondence with other senior officers. But Sarah also found evidence of a second communication system, one that operated entirely outside official channels. The hidden system used sophisticated encryption and routing techniques to mask both the content and destination of messages. Sarah couldn't decode the messages themselves without specialized equipment, but she could analyze the metadata, the digital fingerprints that revealed when communications occurred and how they were routed through the global internet infrastructure. What she found was damning. Over the past 8 months, Burke had been sending encrypted messages to recipients whose identities were hidden behind layers of digital anonymization. The timing of these communications corresponded precisely with major military operations and intelligence briefings. Most troubling of all, the most recent message had been sent just that morning, shortly after Burke received the classified files that Sarah was now analyzing. But as Sarah prepared to copy the communication logs, she heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of Burke's voice in the hallway, talking to Captain Martinez. He had returned nearly an hour earlier than scheduled, and he was walking directly toward his office. Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds before Burke entered the room and found her accessing his personal computer. Her training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, but the preparations felt inadequate when facing the possibility of discovery. If Burke was innocent, finding her in his office would destroy her cover and potentially end her career. If he was guilty, it might end her life. Moving with the fluid efficiency of someone trained in close-quarters operations, Sarah disconnected her equipment, cleared the computer's access logs, and positioned herself beside Burke's desk as if she had been waiting for his return. When the Admiral entered his office, he found her standing respectfully with a folder in her hands, her expression showing nothing more than mild concern. "Miss Chun," Burke said, his eyes immediately scanning his office for any sign that something was amiss. "What are you doing here?" "I finished the document review you requested," Sarah replied, extending the folder toward him. "I wanted to deliver it personally because I noticed some discrepancies in the operational timelines that might require your attention." Burke accepted the folder, but his gaze remained fixed on Sarah's face, searching for any indication that her presence in his office had ulterior motives. "Discrepancies?" "Yes, sir. The submarine positioning data appears to conflict with the scheduled naval exercises. I thought you should be aware of the inconsistencies before tomorrow's briefing." It was a calculated risk. Sarah was demonstrating analytical abilities that went beyond simple filing and summarization, but she was also providing Burke with legitimate concerns that any competent reviewer would have noticed. His response would tell her whether he appreciated thorough work or was suspicious of unexpected competence. Burke opened the folder and quickly scanned Sarah's summary. His expression shifted from suspicion to surprise as he read her analysis. The discrepancies she had identified were real and significant, the kind of intelligence problems that could complicate military planning if not addressed promptly. "This is actually quite good work," he said, and Sarah heard something unexpected in his voice: respect. "You're right about these timeline conflicts. How did you spot the pattern?" "I have a background in systems analysis," Sarah replied, offering just enough truth to explain her capabilities without revealing their full extent. "Before working here, I spent several years in private sector consulting, helping companies identify operational inefficiencies." It was a cover story that had been carefully constructed to explain skills that might otherwise seem suspicious. Burke nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation, but Sarah noticed that his body language remained tense, alert in a way that suggested he was still processing unexpected information. "Miss Chun," Burke said carefully, "I owe you an apology for my comments yesterday. It appears I underestimated your abilities." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining her neutral tone despite the satisfaction she felt at his admission. "In fact," Burke continued, "I have another assignment that might benefit from your analytical skills. There's been some unusual activity in our communication systems, security concerns that require review by someone with your kind of attention to detail." Sarah felt another chill of recognition. If Burke was guilty of espionage, asking her to investigate security breaches was either an incredibly bold move or a trap designed to test her loyalties. If he was innocent, he might be offering her exactly the access she needed to identify the real threat. "I'd be honored to help with security matters," she replied. "Excellent. Report to me first thing tomorrow morning, and we'll discuss the details." Burke paused, studying her face again with the same intensity she had noticed earlier. "Miss Chun, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, sir. Have we met before? Outside of work, I mean. You seem familiar in a way I can't quite place." Sarah felt her training kick in, the automatic responses that had kept her alive in hostile territory. Burke's question could be innocent curiosity, or it could indicate that her cover was beginning to unravel. Either way, her answer would be crucial. "I don't believe so, Admiral. I have one of those faces that people think they recognize." Burke nodded, but Sarah could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied with her response. As she left his office, she realized that their relationship had shifted in ways that made her investigation both easier and more dangerous. Burke now trusted her enough to involve her in sensitive security work, but he was also beginning to see her as something more than the invisible clerk she had pretended to be. That evening, Sarah met with Collins at their secure location to report her findings. The evidence of Burke's unauthorized communications was significant, but the intelligence veteran was not ready to draw final conclusions. "The communication patterns are suspicious," Collins agreed, reviewing the data Sarah had collected. "But They could also be explained by counterintelligence operations that we're not aware of. Senior officers sometimes maintain back-channel communications for legitimate security reasons. What about the timing? Sarah asked. The messages correlate directly with security breaches and classified briefings. Correlation isn't causation, Collins replied, though his tone suggested he was as concerned as Sarah. Burke could be investigating the same security leaks you're tracking. His unusual communications might be part of an effort to identify and stop whoever is feeding information to foreign sources. Sarah realized that her investigation had reached a critical juncture. The evidence against Burke was substantial, but not conclusive. She could recommend immediate action based on what she had discovered, potentially stopping a traitor, but also risking the career and reputation of an innocent man. Alternatively, she could continue her investigation, gathering more definitive proof while risking that a guilty Burke might discover her surveillance or complete whatever operation he was planning. There's something else, Collins said, reviewing additional intelligence reports. We've received confirmation that a major operation is planned for next week, something that would require detailed knowledge of American naval capabilities. If Burke is feeding information to foreign agents, we may be running out of time to stop him. He's asked me to help with a security investigation, Sarah reported. He wants to discuss it tomorrow morning. Collins leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. That's either the break we need or the beginning of a very dangerous game. If Burke is innocent, he's offering you direct access to information that could help identify the real threat. If he's guilty, he's trying to determine how much I know and whether I'm a threat to his operation, Sarah finished. Can you handle it? Sarah thought about the question seriously. Her training had prepared her for hostile interrogations, armed confrontations, and survival in enemy territory. But this situation was different, requiring her to maintain her cover while operating in close proximity to someone who might be actively trying to expose her. Yes, she said finally. But if Burke is the source of the security leaks, tomorrow might be my last chance to prove it. After that, he'll either be arrested or he'll disappear. As Sarah drove home that night, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had joined the Gray program to serve her country, but the reality of that service was far more complex than she had imagined. The greatest threats to national security weren't always obvious enemies in foreign countries. Sometimes they were decorated heroes who had lost their way, trusted leaders who had been compromised or corrupted. Admiral Burke had called her pathetic, had dismissed her as incompetent and unworthy of respect. But tomorrow, she would sit across from him as an equal, helping him investigate security breaches while secretly investigating him. The irony was profound, but so was the responsibility. If Burke was innocent, Sarah's investigation would help clear a good man's name while continuing the search for the real traitor. If he was guilty, her discovery would prevent a security breach that could cost lives and compromise national interests. Either way, the quiet administrative assistant who had endured months of dismissal and condescension was about to prove that competence came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one nobody saw coming. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of Washington weather that made even the most imposing government buildings look somber and unwelcoming. Sarah entered the Pentagon with her usual quiet efficiency, but internally, she was preparing for what could be the most dangerous conversation of her career. At exactly 8 o'clock, she knocked on Admiral Burke's office door, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a notepad that concealed a recording device smaller than a coin. Burke's voice called for her to enter, and she found him standing at his window, looking out at the Potomac River with the expression of a man carrying heavy burdens. "Miss Chun," he said without turning around, "thank you for coming early. Please have a seat." Sarah settled into the chair across from Burke's desk, noting that he seemed different this morning. The arrogance and dismissive attitude she had grown accustomed to were gone. replaced by something that looked almost like weariness. When he finally turned to face her, she saw that his eyes held a gravity that hadn't been there before. Before we discuss the security investigation, Burke said, returning to his desk, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly, regardless of how strange they might seem. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her expression remained neutral. Of course, Admiral. Burke opened a folder that had been sitting on his desk and removed a single photograph. He placed it face down in front of Sarah without revealing its contents. Miss Chun, I've been reviewing your personnel file, your background checks, your employment history. Everything appears to be perfectly in order, but something has been bothering me since our conversation yesterday. He paused, studying her face with the same intensity she had noticed before. Your analytical skills, your attention to detail, your ability to spot operational inconsistencies that experienced officers miss. These aren't the skills of someone who spent years doing administrative consulting work. Sarah kept her breathing steady, her hands relaxed in her lap. I've always been good at pattern recognition, Admiral. It's just how my mind works. Perhaps, Burke said, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. Or perhaps you're someone who has been trained to notice things that others miss. Someone who understands operational security because you've worked in environments where your life depended on that understanding. Without breaking eye contact, Burke flipped the photograph face up on his desk. Sarah looked down and felt her world shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. The image showed her in military fatigues, standing beside two other soldiers in what was clearly a combat zone. Her hair was shorter, her face was leaner, and she was holding an assault rifle with the casual familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. But the photograph was impossible. Sarah had never served in conventional military units, had never been deployed in any capacity that would have resulted in official documentation. Her gray program assignments were classified at levels that made such records non-existent, and her cover identity had been built to show no military service whatsoever. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice calm despite the chaos in her mind. "That's not the right question," Burke replied. "The right question is why someone went to extraordinary lengths to erase all traces of your military service, why your official records show no connection to defense or intelligence work, and why you've been operating under what appears to be a completely fabricated identity." Sarah realized that she was facing a situation her training had prepared for, but hoped she would never encounter. Total exposure by someone who possessed intelligence capabilities she hadn't anticipated. Burke had somehow obtained information about her real background, information that should have been impossible for him to access regardless of his security clearance. "I think there's been some mistake," she said, maintaining her cover even as she analyzed possible escape routes and defensive options. "I've never served in the military." Burke leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the smile of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion that had been troubling him for some time. "Miss Chun, or whoever you really are, I've been investigating security breaches in this building for the past 6 months. Unauthorized access to classified systems, communications with foreign agents, sensitive information being leaked to hostile intelligence services. The kind of sophisticated operation that would require someone with advanced training in covert operations." Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, pieces that revealed a picture she hadn't expected. "You're not the source of the security leaks." "No," Burke confirmed. "I'm trying to stop them. And yesterday, when you demonstrated analytical capabilities that went far beyond anything in your official background, I realized that either you're the threat I've been looking for, or you're someone else who's been looking for the same thing." The Admiral stood and walked to a wall safe hidden behind one of his commendations. He entered a complex code, removed a thick folder, and returned to his desk. When he opened the folder, Sarah saw surveillance photographs, communication intercepts, and financial records that represented months of careful investigation. "For the past half year, I've been conducting my own counterintelligence operation, Burke explained. Someone with high-level access has been feeding operational information to Chinese intelligence services. The methods are sophisticated, the security protocols are nearly perfect, and the person responsible has managed to avoid detection by our standard security measures. He spread several documents across his desk, each one showing evidence of compromised operations, leaked intelligence, and security breaches that had cost American lives and strategic advantages. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same investigation she had been conducting, but from a different angle and with different resources. 3 days ago, Burke continued, I identified the source of the leaks. It's someone who has access to the most sensitive naval intelligence, someone who understands our operational procedures well enough to extract information without triggering security alerts, and someone who has been using their position to gradually feed strategic intelligence to foreign agents. Sarah felt a chill of anticipation. Who? Burke turned one of the surveillance photographs toward her, and Sarah found herself looking at Captain Martinez, Burke's own aide and trusted deputy. The image showed Martinez meeting with an unidentified Asian man in what appeared to be a restaurant parking lot, exchanging an envelope in a transaction that was clearly designed to avoid detection. Captain Martinez, Burke said, his voice carrying a mixture of anger and disappointment. A man I've trusted with classified information for 3 years, someone I recommended for promotion, someone who has been selling our secrets to pay for gambling debts, and a lifestyle his military salary couldn't support. Sarah studied the evidence, her trained eye recognizing the thoroughness of Burke's investigation. Financial records showed that Martinez had been receiving regular payments through a complex network of shell companies. Communication logs revealed patterns of unauthorized access to classified systems. Surveillance photos documented multiple meetings with known intelligence operatives. This is comprehensive, Sarah said, and this time she didn't hide the professional appreciation in her voice. But why are you showing me this instead of reporting it to security services? Burke's expression grew grim. Because I've discovered that the security breach goes deeper than one corrupt officer. Martinez has been feeding information to someone else within the Pentagon, someone with even higher clearance levels who has been coordinating the intelligence transfers. I believe there's a conspiracy that involves multiple people in positions of trust. He paused, studying Sarah's reaction carefully. And I believe you're here to investigate the same conspiracy. The question is whether you're working for American interests or someone else's. Sarah realized that she had reached a decision point that would determine not just the success of her mission, but potentially her survival. Burke had demonstrated that he possessed intelligence capabilities and resources she hadn't anticipated. He had identified her as someone operating under false identity, but he hadn't yet determined her loyalties or objectives. She could maintain her cover, continue pretending to be a civilian administrative assistant, and hope that Burke's suspicions didn't lead to actions that would compromise her mission. Or she could take a calculated risk, reveal enough of her real identity to gain Burke's trust, and work with him to stop the security threats they had both identified. The decision was made easier by a soft chime from her secure communication device, indicating an urgent message from Collins. Sarah discreetly checked the device and felt her blood pressure spike as she read the brief text. Major intelligence operation plan for today. All assets compromised. Abort immediately. Admiral, Sarah said, setting aside months of careful deception. My real name is classified, my military service is classified, and my current assignment is classified at levels that require special authorization for you to access. But I'm going to tell you who I am because we're both running out of time. Burke leaned forward, his full attention focused on her words. I'm part of a joint CIA military special operations unit that handles threats too sensitive for conventional investigation. I've been embedded here for 3 years investigating the same security leaks you've discovered. And I just received intelligence that indicates something major is happening today, something that will compromise American lives if we don't act immediately." Sarah reached into her satchel and removed a secure tablet that displayed her real credentials, her gray program authorization, and a summary of her 3-year investigation. Burke reviewed the information with the focused attention of someone who understood the implications of what he was seeing. "Gray program," he said quietly. "I've heard rumors, but I never knew it actually existed." "It exists," Sarah confirmed. "And right now, it's telling me that Captain Martinez and his co-conspirators are planning to transfer critical intelligence about next week's naval operations to foreign agents. If they succeed, American servicemen and women will die, and our strategic position in the Pacific will be compromised." Burke was silent for a long moment, processing information that challenged everything he thought he knew about security, loyalty, and the woman he had dismissed as pathetic just 2 days earlier. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new respect that went beyond mere professional acknowledgement. "What do you need from me?" "I need your help to stop Martinez and identify his contacts within the Pentagon. My resources are limited because my cover can't be blown, but together we might be able to prevent a catastrophic security breach." Burke nodded, then activated a secure communication system that Sarah hadn't known existed in his office. "Agent Collins," he said into the encrypted channel, "this is Admiral Burke. I believe you, and I need to have a conversation about mutual interests." Sarah stared at Burke in surprise as Collins' familiar voice responded through the secure channel. "Admiral, I've been hoping for this call. I think it's time we coordinated our efforts." "You knew," Sarah said, realizing that her investigation had been more complex than she had understood. "You knew Burke was investigating the same security breaches." "We've been aware of the Admiral's counterintelligence work," Collins confirmed through the communication system. "But we needed to determine whether he was part of the problem or part of the solution. Your investigation provided the confirmation we needed." Burke looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal embarrassment. "Miss Chun, or whatever your real name is, I owe you a profound apology. I called you pathetic because I couldn't see past my own assumptions about competence and capability. The truth is, you've been doing the job I thought I was doing, but you've been doing it better and with greater courage than I could have managed." "Admiral," Sarah replied, "we both made assumptions. The difference is that yours were based on prejudice, while mine were based on operational necessity." Before Burke could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the building. Emergency lights flashed in the corridors, and Sarah's secure device indicated that multiple security breaches were occurring simultaneously throughout the Pentagon. "They're making their move," Sarah said, checking intelligence feeds that showed unauthorized access attempts across multiple classified systems. "Martinez and his accomplices are trying to extract as much information as possible before their operation is exposed." Burke immediately activated emergency security protocols, but Sarah realized that conventional responses wouldn't be sufficient. The conspirators had been planning this operation for months, and they understood the Pentagon's security systems well enough to stay ahead of standard countermeasures. "Admiral," Sarah said, "I need you to trust me completely. What I'm about to do will expose my real capabilities, but it's the only way to stop them." Without waiting for Burke's response, Sarah activated equipment that officially didn't exist, establishing direct communication links to gray program assets, military intelligence units, and security services that Burke had never heard of. Her fingers moved across secure keyboards with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years operating in hostile environments where speed and accuracy meant the difference between life and death. Within minutes, Sarah had coordinated a response that involved multiple agencies, special operations units, and counterintelligence assets. Captain Martinez and 5 other Pentagon personnel were simultaneously detained across the building, their access to classified systems immediately revoked, and their communications with foreign agents intercepted and decoded. As security teams secured the suspects and evidence, Burke watched Sarah work with the fascination of someone seeing true professional competence for the first time. The quiet woman he had dismissed as incompetent was orchestrating a complex counterintelligence operation with skills that few people in the military possessed. "How long have you been able to do this?" Burke asked as Sarah completed her coordination of the security response. 8 years of training, 3 years of preparation, and about 10 minutes of actual operational work, Sarah replied. Most of intelligence work is waiting and watching. The exciting part happens very quickly. Colin's voice came through the secure channel with an update that brought their operation to a successful conclusion. All suspects are in custody, all classified systems are secure, and we've identified the full extent of the intelligence network. Sarah, your 3-year investigation provided the foundation for stopping what could have been a catastrophic security breach. As the immediate crisis ended, Sarah and Burke found themselves alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of an investigation that had nearly cost American lives and strategic advantages. The emergency alarms had stopped, but the tension between them remained, transformed now from suspicion to mutual recognition. "Miss Chun," Burke said formally, "I want you to know that everything I said about your competence was not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. In my 30 years of military service, I've never seen anyone handle a crisis with the skill and professionalism you demonstrated today." Sarah looked at the man who had called her pathetic, who had dismissed her as incompetent, who had nearly compromised her mission through his own arrogance and assumptions. But she also saw someone who had been conducting his own investigation, who had been trying to protect the same American interests she served, and who had just acknowledged his mistakes with the kind of honesty that few senior officers possessed. "Admiral," she replied, "you were protecting your country the best way you knew how. The fact that there were better ways doesn't diminish the courage it took to investigate threats from within your own command." Burke nodded, but Sarah could tell he was still processing the implications of everything that had happened. "What happens now? To you, I mean. Do you disappear back into whatever classified program you came from?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Her 3-year assignment was complete, her cover was blown, and the Gray program would undoubtedly reassign her to a new mission in a different location under a different identity. It was the nature of her work, the price of the service she had chosen. "Probably," she said honestly. "People like me don't usually stay in one place very long." "People like you," Burke repeated thoughtfully. "Sarah, I've spent my entire career thinking I understood what military service meant, what competence looked like, what loyalty required. Today I learned that some of the most important work is done by people I never see, never acknowledge, and never thank." He paused, then extended his hand in a gesture of respect that Sarah hadn't expected. "Thank you for your service. Thank you for protecting things I didn't even know needed protection. And thank you for proving that I still have a lot to learn about recognizing excellence when I see it." Sarah shook Burke's hand, feeling the strange satisfaction of completing a mission that had tested every skill she possessed. She had protected American interests, stopped a security breach that could have cost lives, and proven that competence came in forms that even experienced military officers might not recognize. But perhaps most importantly, she had reminded herself why she had chosen this difficult, dangerous, and thankless work in the first place. Somewhere in America, military families would sleep safely because of operations they would never hear about, conducted by people whose names they would never know, in service of freedoms they might take for granted. As Sarah prepared to leave Admiral Burke's office for the final time, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had endured months of condescension and dismissal, had maintained her cover while investigating threats to national security, and had successfully completed one of the most challenging assignments of her career. The man who had called her pathetic now understood that she was anything but. The investigation that had seemed impossible had been concluded successfully. And the quiet administrative assistant who had been invisible for 3 years had proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in a room was indeed the one nobody saw coming. Admiral Burke had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions, competence, and the true nature of service. But Sarah had learned something equally important, that protecting her country sometimes required not just skills and courage, but the patience to be underestimated until the moment when being underestimated became the greatest weapon of all.